So for section 3.5, we're going to be writing equations from different forms. And I'm going to start with a simple one because they're going to want the answer in y equals mx plus b. And so they're going to say through a point, 0.03 with a slope of 3. Well, if you notice, this point happens to be the y-intercept. So that is the y-intercept. Basically, our b is 3, and our slope is 3. So our equation is going to be y is equal to mx 3x plus 3. And that's great when we can just fill in y equals mx plus b when they give me the b, when they give me the y-intercept, and they give me the m, they give me the slope. Okay? But the problem is, what happens if they don't give me the y-intercept? What if I have a different point, like 2,5, and they say a slope of 4? Could you write that equation? Now, I mean, I could sketch that out and try to work my way back and figure out what the y-intercept is. Or, algebraically, what we use is what's called the point-slope formula. And the reason we call it point-slope formula is because it contains, once again, two things. It contains a point, that's our x1 and y1, and it contains a slope, that's still the m. One way of getting this real quick, because I don't like to just use formulas and go, okay, let's just, pretend like we've had this forever. You don't necessarily, if you're not comfortable with this equation, put it in a note card, first of all, but you should be comfortable with this equation over here. This is just the equation for slope. M equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. The change in the y's over the change in the x, right? Well, what if I didn't have 2 points? What if I only had 1? Right? Could you take this and basically solve this so that we don't have this fraction, because I'm going to have a point and a slope? Well, I could clear out the fraction by multiplying both sides by x minus x1. That clears that out. And if I do it to one side, x minus x1 on the other one, I'm going to reorder this because I don't like to distribute backwards. So it would be m times x minus x1 is equal to y minus y1. Well, geez, that's just the point-slope formula. They just write it as y minus y1 equals m x minus x1. This is the same exact equation as slope. It's just been solved for that y minus y1. Okay? And when do we use this? Well, when I have a point, and our point would be the x1 and y1, right? And a slope and an m. And I can fill that in, and by leaving the other x and y as x and y, we end up with the equation. So let's go ahead and practice this. Okay? So our point, 2 is going to be our x1, 5 is going to be our y1. That's going to be our point. So when I go fill this in, it's going to be y minus the y1. The y1, or the y value point, is 5 equals, here goes the m. M is the slope. So we put 4 parentheses x minus 2. So what can we do with this? Well, we can solve this, because remember, I want this in y equals mx plus b form. So to solve it for y equals mx plus b, we would have to take the 4 and distribute it. 4x minus 8. And then last, add the 5 to get y equals 4x minus 3. And if I were to graph that, 4x minus 3, it would have a slope of 4, and it contains the point 2, 5. You could even check that. If I plug in a 2 for x and a 5 for y, I get 5 is equal to 4 times 2 minus 3. 5 is equal to 8 minus 3. Hey, 5 equals 5, right? This is the equation that contains that point and has a slope of 4. Okay, so our new formula, point-slope formula, contains the point and the slope. We fill them in, and then we can solve for y. Let's kick it up a notch. They say, what if I wanted an equation parallel to this through the point -1, -2? Well, parallel means what? Well, we had this in previous. Parallel same slope. The lines never cross. So what is the slope in this equation? Well, the slope is 2. So the slope that I'm going to use down here will also be 2. Because I'm going to find an equation parallel to this, therefore it will have the same slope. And they gave me a point. What's the point? Well, it's an x and a y. I will color code that. The x goes in for the x in the equation, and the y goes in for the y of the equation. So now it's just a matter of filling this in. Y minus a negative 2. If you want to make that y plus 2, you can. I'm going to just write y minus negative 2 equals, what's the m? X minus negative 1. Like I said, I'm going to clean this up, so I'm going to think of this as y plus 2 equals 2 times x plus 1. By the way, a lot of your homework, this will be the answer. If they just want the answer, if they want the answer in point slope form, then you're done. If they want the equation in slope intercept form, then you have to solve for y. And how did we do that? Well, we said take the 2n, distribute it, 2x plus 2, solve for y, so that y equals 2x. That is the equation that has a slope of 2 parallel to this one and crosses through the point negative 1, negative 2. Another way we can say, or ask that question, is we can say perpendicular to an equation through a point. I see the point, I have to find the slope. You have to remember, what does perpendicular mean? Well, perpendicular means that if the slope that they give me is a over b, then perpendicular to that will be opposite and reciprocal. So here, the slope is negative 2/3. The most common mistake people do is they go, sweet, I'm just going to use the slope of negative 2/3. No, because they said I want an equation perpendicular to this, which means the slope that I'm going to use should be opposite. Instead of negative, it will be positive and reciprocal. 2/3 flipped is 3 over 2. So that is the slope I will use because it will be perpendicular. So now I have a slope, I have a point. What do I do? Well, I have a formula for that. Y minus y1 equals m, x minus x1. Y minus, what's the y1? Well, that's the y value from the point. Y minus 6 equals m, x minus a negative 3. That becomes x plus 3. Solve for y. Once again, if some of the homework asks for point slope form, you're done. But chances are, for me, I would ask you to put this back in and y equals mx plus b, which means we would need to take that 3/2 in, distribute it. How about 3/2 x plus, now I've got 3/2 times 3. Bring this work to the side. You need to be able to handle this arithmetic on the side. 3/2 times 3 over 1 is 9/2. And last but not least, adding 6 to it, y is equal to 3/2 x plus, bring the work to the side, 9/2 plus 6. They need a common denominator of 2, so 9/2 plus 12/2, 21/2. By the way, you're allowed to use a calculator. Your calculator can add fractions, okay? So if you got one of those $5 calculators, it adds fractions. You don't have to be able to do all this work on the side. Go ahead and let the calculator do the heavy lifting, okay? But this would be your final answer in slope intercept form. Okay. this is the hardest example, and then I'm actually just going to go through some others. I'm just going through each type at this point. But the hardest example they're going to ask is where they say, find an equation through these 2 points. You're like, well, that's not cool, because you said we're going to use the formula point-slope form, and they just gave me 2 points. You have to make the connection that if they've given you 2 points, that they have given you the slope. Not directly, you have to be able to find it. x1, y1, x2, y2. Find the difference in the y's. 6 minus 5 over the difference in the x's. -1 minus 2. Gives us 1 over -3. Probably not going to leave it like that. How about -1/3? If they gave you 2 points, they really have given you the slope. You just have to find it. Now what do? Well, I now have a point and a slope. In fact, we have 2 points, right? Which point do we use? Good news is it doesn't matter. This line will go through both of those points, so either one. I would choose the easiest, which for me is the 2 and the 5. So y minus 2 equals m. X minus, I think I just messed that up. Oh, shame on me. Y minus 5 equals the m, x minus 2. And then we would solve that by taking the 1/3 and distributing it. -1/3 x plus 2/3, adding the 5. If we give them a common denominator of 3, y would equal -1/3 x plus 17/3. Like I said, I would use the easiest of the 2 points. If I'd have used the other one, it would have been y minus 6 equals m. X minus -1 becomes plus 1. Once I distribute, y minus 6 is equal to -1/3 x minus 1/3. If I add the 6 this time, a common denominator of 3, y would equal -1/3 x plus 17/3. It should work for both, because keep in mind, this is the point, this is the equation that goes through both of those points, so either one should work, okay? Chances are the homework's going to have you stop at this point, just writing the equation in point-slope form. You can expect from me to ask you to take that equation and put it in slope-intercept. Okay? So this is really all the skills, but I want to take some time and just go over some more examples, especially some are going to be a little trickier. This is not the, some of these are just extra practice, and some of these are harder things you'll see in the homework. You'll see. Okay, let's start with this. They want an equation. They give me a point. They give me a slope. They say, what's the equation in point-slope form? Well, y minus, what's y1? It's the y value here. So it's y minus -1 equals m. What's m? So let's fill in the -2/3. X minus x1. What's x1? That one. Your homework literally starts off with this. They probably want you to write that as y plus 1 equals -2/3 x minus 1. But that's where the homework will start. I'll ask you to put this back into, so right now this is in point-slope form. If I ask you for slope-intercept, then you basically have to take this and solve for y. How do we do that? Distribute first. Negative times a negative is positive. And then subtract the 1 to get y is equal to -2/3 x minus 1/3. that is definitely something you need to be able to do for the test. This is harder than what will be on the test. But I want you to see we can handle these harder numbers, especially even if you struggle with fractions, especially with using of the technology. So what is this one? Well, they give me 2 points. 2 points. We said, well, I can't use point slope yet. We have to find the slope first. We need a slope. Change in y over change in x. y2 minus y1, x2 minus x1. y2 minus y1, that would be negative 1/5 minus 4 over x2 minus x1, negative 1/5 minus 1/10. Giving these a common denominator, I think I have negative 21/5 over, giving these a common denominator, negative 3/10. By the way, don't make this complicated. Let's use the technology, right? Let's see, where'd my calculator go? So we had negative 1/5 minus 4. Let's see what that would be. Negative 1/5 minus 4. That was negative 21/5. Felt pretty good about that. Negative 1/5 minus 1/10. Negative 3/10. Feeling pretty good about that. How do we divide a fraction? Short answer is we don't. That would be negative 21/5 divided by negative 3/10, which is the same thing as negative 21/5 times negative 10 over 3. That gives us 210 divided by 15, or I think I want to say 14. That's our slope. If you're like, okay, I don't have a calculator that does that, go get one. They're like $5. But worst case scenario, give them a common denominator. Negative 1/5 minus 25th is negative 21/5. Negative 1/5 minus 1/10, common denominator. Negative 2/10 minus 1/10 is negative 3/10. So make sure you can handle this, okay? Unfortunately, we're not done. We'd have to fill in one of these points, okay? Probably if they're wanting this, I would just use the first one. So it'd be y minus 4 equals m x minus a negative 1/5, I believe. I'll double check that. Nope, 1/10. Minus positive 1/10. Okay. I think I did that right now. Okay. Then, and chances are, again, that would be your answer in the homework. The worst thing they could have you do is take that 14n. So I'd have y minus 4 is equal to 14x minus 7/5. That just reduced. 14 times 1/10 gives me 14/10, gives me 7/5. And last but not least, when we add the 4, we get that y is equal to 14x plus 13/5. Ugh. This would not be something I would test you on, but this is something you should be able to do, either with your technology or by hand on the homework. A couple more examples. The homework will do this to you. Okay? Through this point, parallel to this. What's so mean about this? Well, parallel is same slope. Parallel is y equals mx plus b. Parallel is m. This is not in y equals mx plus b. So to get this, we'd have to take this first equation and solve for y. They will do this in the homework. That means I need to subtract the 4x. Get negative 3y is equal to negative 4x plus 2. Divide by the negative 3. Everything gets divided by a negative 3. So that y is equal to positive 4/3 x minus 2/3. And what do I take from this? Parallel meant the same slope, so I take this slope and I steal it. The slope we will use will be 4/3. What else do I fill in? The point. Y minus negative 1 equals 4/3 x minus 5. Y plus 1 is equal to 4/3 x minus 5. Double check if they want the answer in point slope form, you're done. If they want it in slope intercept form, you have to take the 4/3 and distribute it. So how about 4/3 x minus 20/3? Subtract the 1, and y equals 4/3 x minus 23/3. Okay, so depending on the question, either of these could be the answer, whether they want it in point slope form or slope intercept form. These will be harder than what will be on the test. I will have questions like this on the test, but not quite this difficult. And last, through this and perpendicular. Once again, perpendicular means opposite reciprocal slope. This doesn't give me the slope, so I have to take it again and solve for y. Negative 2y is equal to negative 3x plus 8, dividing by the negative 2, which everything gets divided. Y is equal to positive 3/2 x minus 4. What does perpendicular mean? I will take this slope. Don't use it. Perpendicular doesn't mean same slope. We already have something for that. It's parallel, right? So the slope that I will use here will be opposite, negative, and reciprocal flipped. So now I have my slope, negative 2/3. Let's fill in the point. Y minus y1 is 5 is equal to m x minus a negative 2, about x plus 2. If I want this in slope-intercept form, I'm going to take both sides. I'm going to take the 2/3 and distribute it. Minus 4/3. If I add the 5 with a common denominator, y would equal negative 2/3 x plus 11/3. Double check that. That's everything I can ask. It doesn't get any crazier than this. Okay? The homework will be harder than what's on the test. How will you know? We'll have a quiz. We'll have a review. You'll see. But if you can handle these, you should be able to handle the homework. Sorry, the test, no problem.